The Mask of Masculinity, we're passing on the right intergenerational messages. When I reached out to my speakers, I was so thankful and grateful that they said yes, because I know it's a topic that we don't always talk about. My name is Karlyn Percil. I am very excited and honored to be your host here tonight, in conjunction with the Spoke Club. Even before you meet our speakers, let's give them a round of applause for being vulnerable and brave enough to say yes.
For me, and this was probably the influence of my father, was not showing my feelings, not showing pain, not showing weakness. These, traditional masks of masculinity. I definitely, I used to imitate my father. I remember my father was in construction, and I used to wait for him to come home, wait for the big truck to come into the parking lot, and I'd be out there in the balcony waiting for him to come up, and I would dress like him. I'd put on a little white undershirt, and that undershirt doesn't have the best stereotype to it, but that's what my father wore. And I wanted to be like him. I wanted to be strong like him. And he taught me the traditional way of not showing pain, not wearing band-aids, not shedding a tear, all of those things. And thank goodness I had my mother, who I was very close to. And although I was trying to emulate my father, I always kept the bond close with my mother, sort of behind my father's back. To make sure that I could express my feelings and get sort of the acknowledgement that I needed on an ongoing basis. Us men need a lot of acknowledgement, you know that, girls, right? So
you're doing great.
Thank you, I needed that.
Good job.
So that's the traditional image that my father created for me to follow, essentially, and emanate.
When I think about the phrase, be a man, the first thing I think about is bullying. Because a typical man that would be saying, be a man, would be somebody who's trying to get you to do something. Be a man and pick up the thing. Be a man and throw the thing harder. Be a man and man up, and it's that bullying type of mentality that men have to try to get you to do. Drink some more, drink another shot, when you don't want to drink it. So, luckily for me, my personality was one in which people said I'd walk on a crooked line and cut straight. So when somebody told me that, I would say, no, I'm not doing that. When somebody said, yeah, let's go to the strip club, I said, I'm not interested in doing that. Not to say that I haven't been to a strip club, don't get me wrong. Full disclosure. But when I didn't want to go, I just made up my mind. I said I didn't want to go. If I didn't want to do cocaine, which I've never done in my life, I wouldn't do it, even though my friends were doing it, some of my friends. So, being a man, I always associate that term and that phrase with just bullies in general. Male bullies, not female bullies.
Okay, so based on that, and I think somebody touched on it when you mentioned that, because a lot of the messages we inherited from our surroundings, our families, unconsciously or consciously, it is modeled in your own family or in your current day situation or environment. How do you ensure, or do you take the time to actually set the role of a man, quote unquote, based on your own definition, for your family based on your own value system? Or do you find yourself being like your father, or being from, coming from the messages that you learned growing up? And how do you ensure that you don't do that? Like, what are some, you can give us some tactical examples. Okay. What do you do to ensure that, for example, you're not your dad, or you're not repeating history, so to speak?
I go to therapy to deal with it, because I'm very aware of, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Not that I'm abusive or have ever been, but that is what I saw, and you can't unsee those things, and I have to be responsible for that. That I don't pass that on. I don't express that as a viable option ever. So I go to therapy. I choose consciously what we're doing in our house. Like, my wife and I would sit down and we would actually talk about like, how do we want this to work? Like, who takes out the garbage, who does the bills, like all of it. None of it is predetermined. We sit down and decide who's gonna do what. And I know my son is sitting there all the time and he's watching data and he's always like looking at me. She's like, he's looking at you. I'm like, I know, I'm working. But it's consciously being aware that I have to do things like rough play with him to show him that he can use his strength, but it not be a bad thing because he's pushing kids at school. So I'm like, he has to learn how to use that strength and not bully. So I'm like, okay, I gotta rough play with him and roll him on the thing and, you know, throw him up and down and get very physical with him, which is something I never had growing up. And since that point, he almost like completely calmed down and was like much better at school. So it's consciously putting things in our life, in our relationship, in our home, and actively choosing it, not just assuming that, well, we all know how that goes. I'm like, there's literally no area of our life that we use that. We just, well, let's reinvent that. Let's reinvent that. How do we want it to go? And then we put that in and make that happen.
So what I've done with my two children, I have a 12-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl, is to be as transparent as I can with them. And I told my son and my daughter, I said, there was a period in my life that I was an alcoholic and an addict, and I've recovered now, and it's going to be in the book, and I want to let you know, at this point they're only like, maybe 7, 11, right? So it's a pretty big topic for such a young age, but I really felt that they needed to know that, and they're very curious, right? So what does that mean? Did you drink too much beer? Yeah. Yeah, you're getting close. This is what I learned from a friend of mine. He had it down to these two things that little boys and little girls need. Verbally, they need to be told from a boy's standpoint is that we believe in them. I believe in you. Little boys need to know that when they're putting on their Superman shirt, that there's someone behind them, their mother, their father, hopefully both, and they're just, giving that gentle push out the door and saying, I believe in you, son. You got this. So we can be the heroes that we all are, inside. And little girls, they need to be told that we're never going to leave them. And that always stuck with me after, my friend told me this. He's going to put this into a book that hopefully he's written by now. But that's something that I tell my little daughter all the time. I remember that I didn't pick her up on time for gymnastics once. And I saw how upset she got, and I'll never forget that. I'll never be late for gymnastics again. And it just goes back to, perhaps that primal fear, and men have it too, don't get me wrong, but the primal fear of that we're going to be alone. And I definitely saw that in my daughter that time I was late for gymnastics, and it's something that I always want to remind her, Daddy's never going to leave you, so